A single pane of glass stood between life and oblivion as Victor Reyes inched the mop cart forward, heart pounding like war drums. His gloves were damp with cleaner, but his mind raced hotter than steam rising from the floor. Across the boardroom, clouds gathered in Veronica Hart's icy gaze as she brandished the German patent booklet like a gauntlet. Translate this in the next 5 minutes, and I'll hand you my quarterly salary. Champagne trembled in crystal flutes and executives stifled giggles behind tailored hands. Victor's breath caught the echo of laughter, a guillotine poised above his quiet dignity. He knelt, palms pressed to polished marble, every nerve ablaze. One wrong move, and his secret lay shattered on this stage. Yet something deeper stirred the latent fire of an abandoned scholar, long silent, awakened to seize justice in the hush of corporate arrogance. If you've ever felt underestimated, drop a comment below, sharing your own invisible moment. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss the next chapters of Victor's extraordinary journey. Victor Reyes had learned early that the world's finest deceptions often hid in plain sight. By day, he was a janitor at Brightcore Technologies, pushing carts and polishing floors until the high-rise gleamed. By night, he was a ghost drifting through empty hallways, invisible, unheard. But tonight, as the steel hands of the clock in the boardroom inched toward midnight, Victor felt more alive than he had in a decade. It began with an innocuous tip from the receptionist's voicemail. Confidential delivery, German patent docs, boardroom after hours. Normally, Victor would have shrugged and continued his routine, but something about the message's clipped formality caught his ear. He wiped foam from the marble step and peered through the door's sliver of frosted glass. Through the bright fluorescent glare, a single lamp illuminated Veronica Hart's silhouette, high heels clicking on the polished floor. "Gentlemen," her voice rang out like a pistol shot. "I'll pay my salary if someone here can translate this." Laughter rippled across the table, rich as coral wine in crystal stems. He felt the room's arrogance seep through the pane like poison. His gloved hand trembled on the mop handle. A movement behind him, he froze. The chief counsel, Samuel Green, lifted his phone to record Veronica's pronouncement. Victor's heart thundered. If this was published as a joke, his past would be exposed. As a professor of Germanic linguistics once celebrated at the University of Central Texas, he'd enjoyed prestige and respect. Then tragedy hit: Sophia's illness, a broken promise to stay by her side, and he'd traded podium for pale. Now a cruel jest threatened to reduce his buried expertise to office gossip. He inhaled. Cement floors and chemical cleansers filled his nostrils, grounding him. He crept forward, crouching. The patent binder lay open on the conference table, technical diagrams and dense clauses sprawling like a maze. A swish of Veronica's silk skirt brushed the leather chair as she leaned back, smirking. Anyone she teased champagne flute balanced on her fingertips. No one volunteered. Victor swallowed. One chance. He nudged the door with his elbow, just enough for him to slip in before the security alarm reset. The room held an almost tangible stillness. Executives froze, eyes widening. Time seemed to dilate. He let the door click shut behind him and stood tall, mop forgotten. Veronica's eyebrows arched. "You?" she said. Voice curious, maybe amused. The three men exchanged glances, uncertain. Victor felt their doubt as clearly as a blade's edge. He advanced to the table, each step echoing on polished marble. Light from the recessed ceiling fixtures cast sharp patterns across the binder's glossy cover. Samuel Green cleared his throat. "Our janitor can read German." Veronica finished, tilting her head. "Impress me." Victor unclasped the binder, the pages fanning open with a whisper. He inhaled the varnished leather smell of the corporate edition and exhaled, calming his racing pulse. He let his eyes roam the first clause, 412.3. The contractor shall grant exclusive back-end access to Brightcore's proprietary genomic dataset. He heard the collective gasp. Proprietary genomic data wasn't just valuable, it was the company's crown jewel. Section 12.3, he said, voice steady, despite the adrenaline churning beneath. It grants the German partner unlimited back-end access to our client genome database, directly violating HIPAA and our confidentiality agreement. Silence. You could have heard a button drop. Victor watched as purple blood crept into Veronica's cheeks. She recovered first, lips tightening. Continue. He flipped to the diagram page, a flowchart of regulatory triggers. This diagram outlines that any co-developed biotech software becomes co-owned, surrendering our IP rights. His words unfurled like banners across the room. Executives exchanged hushed murmurs. Veronica stood, jaw clenched. And you caught that in what, 30 seconds? He inclined his head. Your team skimmed for summary. The devil's in the details. A tense beat. Then Samuel Green pressed a finger to the tablet beside him, summoning the security feed. No one else is logged in. He looked at Victor with new respect and something else, fear. Victor closed the binder and replaced it with silent care. He reached for his mop, hand steady now. The boardroom's sheen no longer intimidated him. It reflected his reclaimed purpose. Veronica stepped forward, her posture no longer mocking but calculating. You saved us hands down, she said quietly. Name your price. Victor paused, mop bristles grazing the marble. Money had never lured him. Recognition never mattered. He looked at Veronica, eyes tracing the high ceiling. No salary check, he replied. I want my translation submitted anonymously. Then I go back to cleaning. She studied him, dark eyes flickering. Anonymity. Why? He pointed to the spectrum of suits around him. Because truth shouldn't depend on titles. Because everyone here assumes a janitor can't outthink a legal team. Let them learn otherwise on their own. A low murmur spread. Veronica folded her arms. Your wish granted, but you'll need a safe channel to deliver the full translation. Victor nodded. I'll drop it in legal's confidential box at dawn. She inclined her head. Dawn it is. Then as he turned toward the door, she called softly, Victor Reyes. He froze. That was the first time anyone had spoken his name in years. He glanced back. Veronica offered a small, genuine smile. Thank you. Victor stepped out into the silent corridor. His mop felt lighter in his hands. A spark had lit within him, a promise that the invisible could seize the spotlight when it mattered most. When the last echo of laughter faded and the boardroom's opulent hum died down, Victor Reyes lingered in the shadow of the doorway for just a heartbeat, chest tightening as though bracing for a storm. The night's chill held firm against the heat of his pulse, and for a moment he simply stood there, eyes tracing the glittering crystal of abandoned champagne flutes and the embossed Brightcore emblem on the mahogany tabletop. Then, with the quiet precision of someone who once navigated lecture halls instead of corridors scrubbed by cleaners' rags, he stepped forward. Each footfall against the marble floor sounded like the beginning of a war drum, soft, deliberate, impossible to ignore once you knew to listen. He slid between the sleek legs of the conference chairs, glanced once at the open binder of German patent text, and felt the old academic fire flicker in his chest. The contract lay sprawled open, technical diagrams and footnotes, looping in tiny Germanic script that only a handful of people on the planet could parse at a glance. Victor had learned that language, one syllable at a time, chased down verb declensions and compound nouns until they felt as natural as breathing, and then he'd walked away from it all. Tonight, though, it called to him louder than any classroom lecture ever had. He crouched, palms brushing the cool edge of the table, the leather of his gloves creaking softly. The room seemed to exhale around him, as if it knew he was trespassing on corporate power. He closed his eyes for an instant, inhaling the faint aroma of lingering champagne and polished wood. Then he opened them again, and the German clauses shimmered into focus. His fingers grazed the page where a dense paragraph detailed unbeschränkter Zugriff, unrestricted access into the company's genomic database. His jaw clenched. He remembered the late nights in his office at the University of Central Texas, the thrill of uncovering linguistic nuance, the pride of publishing papers. All of it had been replaced by mops and floor polish. When life delivered its cruel twist, his wife's illness, his daughter's growing need for a present father instead of an absent scholar. He'd made the choice without regret until now. Now, with the legal team's negligence glaring at him from these pages, Victor read swiftly. 14.7, the partner shall bear no liability for data misuse, and Brightcore shall indemnify in full. His pulse hammered. These clauses weren't just technical, they were a corporate death knell disguised in bureaucratic doublespeak. If this version of the contract went through, Brightcore would forfeit its intellectual property, expose client data, and invite lawsuits that would bleed the company dry. A faint tremor ran through him, equal parts righteous anger and adrenaline. He snapped the binder shut, careful not to attract attention. Then he slid the heavy sheaf of papers into his canvas backpack, zipped it tight, and rose. The room still slept under a veneer of quiet opulence, unaware that its fate now dangled in the hands of a janitor. Victor paused by the wall, fingertips grazing the glass partition that separated him from the executive offices. Past that barrier, Veronica Hart's office lights burned bright. She would rise to command every inch of this floor by dawn. But here he was, king of the silent corridors. He shuffled backward toward the door, backpack snug against his shoulder, then eased the latch and slipped into the hallway. The automatic lights dimmed as he passed, as though the building itself respected his discretion. His breaths were soft, measured each footstep, an echo of the careful life he'd built for the past decade, unseen, unheard, but always watching. The hallway stretched before him like a tunnel of silver-gray walls. He passed closed doors labeled Executive Suite Boardroom, Investor Relations. None of those titles had ever applied to him until tonight. He kept his gaze low, imagining the staid faces behind each door, frozen in surprise, to learn that a man in a janitor's uniform held the key to their survival. When he reached the custodial closet 2 floors down, he slid inside and flicked on the fluorescent light. The cavernous room smelled of pine cleaner and damp towels. Mops and brooms stood in silent ranks, their handles worn smooth from use. He set his backpack on a low shelf, unzipped it, and gently lifted out the contract. The sheer weight of it, thick and authoritative, made his hands ache, but he welcomed the reminder of his old strength. He cleared a shelf of empty paper boxes and laid the pages out, their white edges stark against the beige metal. Victor leaned over eyes, scanning diagrams of genetic sequences and obscure references to EU data security regulations. His academic instincts kicked in, mind whirring through syntax and semantics. He traced a clause on grant of intellectual property rights, nodded, when he recognized the subtle redaction that legal editors had employed to disguise the surrender of patents. His heart sink in his gut was equal measure relief that he understood this labyrinth terror at the stakes. He peeled back his leather-bound lexicon journal from his backpack notes on German compound verbs, scribbles on compliance terminology in French and English. By the locker's hum, he cross-referenced his entries, muttering under his breath, unübertragbar, non-transferable. They can't give that away, period. His thumb traced the margin beside the translated note. Major violation, expose this. A droplet of condensation formed on the window high above, tracking a silver line down the pane. Victor frowned. The rest of the world would sleep right through that drop. He would remember every detail. Outside somewhere, the city's distant heartbeat pulsed against glass. He pictured his daughter Elena curled under a purple blanket in their small Southgate Heights apartment, crayons scattered on the table, waiting for her bedtime story. He clenched his jaw and turned back to the contract. She would never know about this, not yet. He needed to unmask these clauses first. He reached into his pocket for his phone, thumb hovering over the recorder app. No, if anyone found this, it had to look clean, official, untraceable. So he resisted. Instead, he methodically prepared handwritten notes, page numbers, clause references, concise English summaries. He dated them initialed discreetly and slipped them into the binder alongside the translated pages. When he was done, each section of the contract bore his cold, precise commentary enough to alert any lawyer to the traps he'd uncovered. Victor paused back straight, breathing even. In that lull, he felt the old academic exhilaration, the pure, unadulterated joy of revelation. The same joy that had once earned him tenure-track offers and glowing student evaluations. But that life had ended in a hospital room the day he chose to become invisible so someone else could shine. Tonight, for the first time in years, he wasn't hiding. He was reclaiming the power he thought lost. Outside the closet, the corridor lights flicked as a security guard passed by. Victor held his breath until the guard's footsteps receded. He zipped the binder shut, shouldered his pack, and exited into the quiet hall. The cool air felt like baptism, washing the intensity from his skin. He navigated the echoing corridors until he stood before the elevator doors leading down to the lobby. The call button gleamed under the fluorescent halo. He pressed it and waited back, pressed against the opposite wall, heart slowing. The doors parted with a hushed breath. Victor stepped in palms damp against his backpack straps. The car descended smoothly, its mirrored walls reflecting his uniformed image. Back at him, mop bucket wheels parked beside the mirror utility belt clipped at his waist. He looked unfamiliar, yet oddly whole. He pressed the lobby button and exhaled. When he emerged into the marble-floored entrance, the security desk glowed in the dim glow of the overnight lamps. No one bothered to look up. Victor moved past the reception pods and down the tiled hallway toward the confidential document drop, a brass box slot marked Legal Confidential. It stood under a single spotlight, ominous and inviting. His fingertips brushed the slot's cool metal as he slipped the sealed envelope inside. Inside lay his translation, his annotations, and a one-page executive summary that spelled out the dangers in black and white. He didn't leave a name. He didn't need to. The pages would speak for themselves. With the envelope gone, the echo of its fall lingered in his ears. He straightened and turned away, footsteps silent but purposeful, as he retraced his route back to the custodial corridors. Behind him, the lobby emptied into silence, and the guarded secrets of the night settled into the ticking pause before dawn. Victor Reyes, scholar, janitor, invisible sentinel, slipped into the shadows once more, the weight of unseen truths pressing gently against his heart. Under the harsh glare of the locker room fluorescence, Victor Reyes laid the contract pages out across the metal bench, like pieces of a fractured map, each sheet trembling slightly under his gloved fingers. The air smelled sharply of pine cleaner and damp uniforms, a scent he'd come to associate with this makeshift study hall. He leaned forward so that the lines of German patent text filled his vision, each word a potential landmine. Outside, the echo of distant cleaning carts hummed through the ventilation ducts, but in here, there was only Victor's quiet intake of breath and the soft rustle of paper. His eyes flicked to the first page, a preamble promising strategic collaboration and mutual development. He remembered reading similar phrases a decade ago in academic journals, marveling at the elegance of technical German and the precision of its compound nouns. Tonight those phrases throbbed with menace. Victor's lips parted as he whispered, "They never even read it." His thumb drifted to the fine-printed Brightcore logo stamped in the corner, an emblem of pride now poised to betray. He moved to the next sheet, his fingers tracing each line. "Unrestricted back-end access to client genome database," he murmured, translating in his mind with the ease of muscle memory. That single clause could hand over the company's competitive edge to any outside party willing to exploit it. He could almost hear the gears of industry grinding to a halt under the weight of that breach. His chest tightened. A janitor's uniform felt suddenly ill-fitting. Beneath it, the scholar he once was writhed to break free. Victor pushed the papers aside and reached into his backpack for his cracked leather journal, the one filled with margin notes on verb declensions and EU compliance. The notebook's pages were worn thin from repeated consultation, each dog-eared corner a testament to nights spent poring over language theories. He flipped past grammar tables to a page of hastily scrawled German to English translations. Haftungsausschluss. Disclaimer of liability. Geistiges Eigentum, intellectual property. He cross-referenced the contract's clause numbers with his notebook entries, jotting a quick English summary in precise block letters beside each dangerous provision. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. It wasn't the room's heat, it was the magnitude of what he was uncovering. The legal team upstairs had treated this document like a prop in a circus act, waving it around for entertainment. Here, under harsh lights and amid discarded mops and buckets, Victor confronted its deadly seriousness. His gloved hand tightened around the pen. Surrender of IP rights pages. 15 to 18, he wrote, then paused. His daughter Elena's face flashed in his mind, sleeping soundly on the pull-out couch, her sketchbook open beside her. She trusted him to keep their small world safe. If Britcore collapsed, would it send shockwaves through the neighborhood? Would Elena lose her chance at college? The thought sharpened his resolve. He shifted miniature beads of water forming on the stainless steel locker above him. The lockers gleamed with institutional sterility, each numbered door hiding a uniform and a life. To the outside world, each locker's occupant was interchangeable, just another member of the night cleaning crew. But Victor felt the weight of his own identity soothe him. Scholar turned janitor turned clandestine savior. He would see this through. He returned to the contract pages, lingering on a section dense with legal jargon, masking a clause about indemnification. His breath hitched as he translated Brightcore shall indemnify all claims arising from partner use of proprietary data. In plain English, that meant the company would be on the hook for any misuse by the German partner. He underlined the line in red ink, a small, fierce gesture that made the words bleed like a warning beacon. This document needed more than a passing glance. It needed surgical precision. Victor skimmed forward, reading with the speed of someone who once lectured dozens of eager students on linguistic nuance. Page 24 held a diagram of biochemical sequences, lines intersecting in a web of technical references. A fellow academic might have admired its elegance. Victor saw its lethal beauty. With a steady pen, he annotated the diagram's margin, regulatory trap designed to slip past compliance checks. He exhaled through his nose, the exhalation catching like a sigh of anger. How many board members would have missed this if he hadn't dug deeper? He straightened for a moment, listening to the distant hum. Somewhere a radio crackled in a security booth. He thought of waiting another hour, running more translations to ensure no clause escaped his notice. But his mind drifted to Elena's school day pending assignment and a promise he'd made to tuck her in before dawn. He needed to finish, but he also needed rest. Balancing on the narrow edge between exhaustion and urgency, he decided to focus on clarity rather than quantity, pinpointing the most egregious threats. His pen flew across the pages, numbering the critical clauses and scrawling concise bullet point notes. Clause 7.2, unlimited geographic transfer of data. Clause 11.9, waiver of Brightcore's patent enforcement rights. Underlining, bracketing, highlighting with a red margin. The locker room fluorescence buzzed, and Victor's shoulders ached, but his heart hammered with purpose. He folded his journal closed and placed it on top of the translated pages, creating a neat stack ready for delivery. A sudden thump rattled the lockers, and Victor froze. The door at the far end of the room had creaked open security rounds or a curious coworker. He swallowed and pressed his back against the bench, training his eyes on the half-open gap. A shadow passed. Whoever it was didn't stop by his row. Victor exhaled silently and returned his attention to the contract, aware every second counted. He snapped the rubber bands around the pages, fastening them securely. The stack fit easily into his backpack pocket alongside his notebook. He strapped the backpack onto his shoulders, the weight a comforting reminder of the job he'd undertaken. His reflection in the metal locker door showed a man, transformed eyes bright with conviction, posture rigid with determination. He was no longer the invisible custodian. He was the keeper of truth. Rising, he took one last look at the bench, littered with hazardous chemicals and old towels. In that moment, it felt sacred, a hidden altar where he'd wrestled deception into the light. Then he turned and walked calmly toward the exit, each footstep echoing softly in the empty room. As he stepped into the adjacent hallway, control room, lights flickered, eyes unnoticed. The air outside felt cooler, fresher, and Victor inhaled, letting the crispness wash away the locker room's grim intensity. He navigated the labyrinth of corridors until he reached the stairwell leading up to the third floor. He ascended deliberately, floor by floor, each level, marking a step closer to dawn and the legal box in the lobby. By the time he emerged onto the polished third-floor landing, his uniform had shed its indistinctness. He moved with unspoken authority, the contract's secrets secure at his back. When he reached the custodial supplies closet, Victor paused to adjust his backpack, ensuring the pages lay undisturbed. He retrieved a clean dust rag as though resuming his nightly duties, and stepped into the supply room. The scent of floor cleaner greeted him, and for a moment he ran the rag over a spotless tile, just enough to signal routine. Then, without haste, he slipped through the back door onto the service elevator. Each floor flashing by felt like a breath drawn toward revelation. On the ground level, the elevator doors opened to the dim lobby. The muted glow of dawn's first light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Victor carried his unassuming backpack toward the brass document drop box, the confidential label gleaming softly. He pressed the envelope, lightweight, labeled with no name, into the slot. A soft thud echoed as it landed inside, swallowed by bureaucracy. He stood still for a moment, allowing himself the satisfaction of completion. No grand gestures, no acknowledgments, just the raw knowledge that he'd done what needed to be done. Victor turned his gaze upward to the silent atrium, each pane of glass reflecting the pale sunrise. The world beyond waited in ignorance, corporate engines preparing to grind into motion. He would be gone by the time the board's legal team discovered the translation. Slipping the empty envelope from his hand, Victor pocketed it like a prisoner reclaiming an old shackle. He walked away, footsteps blending into the soft morning murmur of custodial carts beginning their rounds. His uniform, still spotless, still blue, held the quiet promise of anonymity. But inside him, a storm had settled into calm resolve. He was a janitor, yes, and he was so much more a guardian of truth who'd revealed the hidden dangers when no one else would. Victor pushed open the squeaking door to his one-bedroom apartment in Southgate Heights and was greeted by the familiar clatter of mismatched furnishings, a threadbare couch, Elena's half-finished sketch of fireflies tacked to the wall, and the steady drip of rain tapping against the kitchen window. The clock on the stove read 1:07 a.m., but Victor barely registered the hour. He crossed the narrow living room, the weight of the stolen contract pressing against his shoulder, as if the paper itself were alive with urgency. The kettle hissed on the chipped stovetop while he rifled through a kitchen drawer for instant coffee packets. He crushed the foil sachet, the granular aroma swirling into the cold, damp air. Fingers trembling, he spooned the granules into a chipped mug poured in boiling water and wrapped his other hand around its warmth. The heat seeped through his glove, kindling a flicker of comfort in his bones. Outside, the rain intensified beads of water racing each other down the glass, erasing the world beyond into shimmering gray. Victor unlatched the battered laptop on the small kitchen table, a relic he'd rescued from an office sale years ago. Its keys bore the faded imprints of past users' letters, worn nearly smooth. He flicked it open, braced on a stack of old textbooks, and watched the screen's glow pierce the room's dimness. As the operating system wheezed to life, he reached for his leather-bound lexicon journal on the corner shelf. The notebook's spine cracked sweetly, pages fanning out to reveal entries in 3 languages. Concise German definitions penned in the margins, French compliance notes, and English annotations on biotech terminology. His mug rattled softly as he placed it beside the laptop, then opened the backpack of secrets, so named for the way it carried responsibilities he'd never advertised. Inside lay the thick stack of patent pages he'd retrieved earlier, now folded neatly into sections. He extracted the first segment, a bundle of 15 pages held together by a yellowed paperclip, and laid them out beside his journal. The rain's rhythmic patter became the night's metronome, urging him onward. Victor cleared his throat and tapped a key to open a blank document. Translation and risk summary. He typed the title stark against the empty white. Then he glanced at the contract's opening clause, for 3.1 licensing terms for gene sequencing algorithms. His eyes narrowed. He remembered the hushed excitement in his old lab when that very algorithm had first been uttered. Now it risked exploitation by an unvetted partner. He sipped the coffee, its bitterness a familiar anchor, and began to translate. German words glided into English sentences under his fingers. He moved swiftly, but not hurriedly, because precision was his ally. The first paragraph slipped by. The licensor grants the licensee revocable rights in all territories for commercial distribution. He paused, then added in parentheses, potential revocation clause. Ambiguous requires clear timeline specification. His journal lay open, and he flicked to the corresponding page. A shorthand note reminding him that ambiguous revocation could allow endless litigation. Victor's focus deepened as he cycled through clauses on data security, user privacy, and co-development rights. Some passages were straightforward, others twisted in legalese so dense they grated at his mind like rusty nails. He fished out his pencil and underlined key German compounds. Haftungsausschluss, geistiges Eigentum, Nutzungsüberlassung. His old professor's voice echoed compound nouns reveal intent. He muttered that phrase under his breath, then scribbled an English equivalence beside each term. The clock on the stove ticked emphatically. Each second marked the distance from the boardroom where he'd first glimpsed this betrayal. He wondered if up there Veronica Hart had any inkling that their empire teetered on these pages. He imagined her reading it, eyes widening as she realized the recklessness of her jest. She would have no choice but to respect the intelligence she'd once mocked. A sudden rush of cold air swept in as his apartment door opened. Elena padded into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Victor froze, heart stuttering. She blinked at the table strewn with papers. "Dad," she whispered. He startled, nearly knocking over his mug. "I'm sorry, Misha," he said softly, switching off the lamp above his papers so only the laptop screen glowed. "I didn't hear you." Elena yawned and climbed onto a stool. "Can I have a cup of water?" Victor poured clear water into a glass and handed it to her. She sipped, then glanced at the German text on the table. "Are you doing homework?" He forced a smile. Something like that. She nodded and hopped down padding back to her bedroom. Victor exhaled. The intrusion reminded him why he fought this sleepless fight for her future, untainted by corporate ruin. He tapped a row of keys, saving his document as Brightcore Translation Draft. DocX then turned back to the contract. By 2:45 a.m., he had translated 3 sections covering licensing data transfer and intellectual property relinquishment. He created headings in his document. Section A, Licensing Risk. Section B, Data Security Breach. Potential Section C, IP Surrender. Under each, he wrote concise bullet-style paragraphs describing the hazards in clear business speak, ensuring no lawyer could dismiss them as vague. His chest ached and his eyelids trembled, but he pressed on. The coffee had long since cooled, and the rain had turned into a drumming downpour. He welcomed the storm's noise. It masked the whir of his CPU and the scribble of his pencil. In that cocoon of white noise, he felt the old exhilaration of discovery, returning a sense that language was more than words, it was power. By 3:30 a.m., the final pages lay sprawled in front of him. He scanned his journal, 7 pages of handwritten notes, 6 pages of German text with English translation beside each line, and a 600-word summary for executives. Victor inhaled deeply, then began the final phase, synthesizing everything into a 1-page executive summary. He opened a new document, typed Executive Summary, confidential and condensed the most critical points. Unlimited back-end access, indemnity waivers, IP rights surrender, and evasive revocation terms. His summary was spare, each sentence crisp. Clause 7.4 grants. Partner unrestricted genomic database access. Clause 11.2 waives all Brightcore liability. Clause 15.3 cedes patent ownership without compensation. He proofread the summary twice, eyes skimming so fast they burned. Satisfied, he saved it as exec/summary brightcore.pdf and closed his laptop with a snap. The screen's glow vanished, leaving only the lamp's faint halo over his scattered notes. He leaned back, feeling the tension flood out of his shoulders. He had transformed the dense madness of patent jargon into a clean, undeniable warning. As he packed his papers, journal, translation summaries into a manila envelope, the reality of his dual life settled in by day, a janitor pushing carts and mopping floors. By night, a translator wielding truth like a scalpel. He sealed the envelope and slid it into his backpack alongside the laptop. The storm had quieted to a soft drum, and Victor alone bore its witness. He turned off the small lamp, leaving only a dim hallway glow spilling through the curtain. For a moment, he simply stood in the darkness, breathing in the aftertaste of coffee and rain. Then he padded to Elena's door and cracked it open. She lay curled under her blanket, the early light of dawn already brushing the walls. He leaned over and kissed her forehead. "I'll be back soon," he whispered. She mumbled in her sleep, then settled deeper into her pillow. Victor closed the door gently and slipped on his coat. The morning chill greeted him as he stepped into the corridor. He slung the backpack over his shoulder, its contents heavy with consequence and hope. Tonight's transformation had equipped him with the weapons of precision and knowledge, tools to challenge corporate arrogance and shield those who depended on him. He paused at the stairwell, fingers brushing the railing as light edged into the sky beyond the window. The world was waking, but for Victor Reyes, the night's work had just reached its climax. With quiet determination, he descended toward the lobby where the legal department's confidential box awaited. The rain had ceased, leaving a gentle hush in its wake. And as he locked eyes on the stairwell's final step, Victor felt something profound. A man reborn in purpose, ready to deliver the silent verdict that would speak louder than any boardroom joke. Victor Reyes stepped off the service elevator into the lobby just as the first pale fingers of dawn crept across the marble floor. He paused in the soft glow, the brass of the legal department confidential slot gleaming like an ancient vault door. The building still groaned under the hush of early morning. The night guards had finished their rounds and the reception area lay empty except for the rhythmic hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of lemon-scented cleaner. He tightened his grip on the manila envelope nestled in his backpack. Inside lay his translation of every German clause and a one-page summary that spelled out the risks without bias or flourish. No signature, no personalized note, just the raw truth. As he approached the slot, he imagined how the pages would slip inside each line a verdict on corporate oversight. His uniform creaked softly as he shifted forward, heart beating with a frenetic calm. Victor slid the envelope into the slot. The paper whispered against metal before thudding gently into the dark interior. He pressed his palm flat against the polished wood panel beside the brass box, closing his eyes for a heartbeat, while the office building slept. In that moment, he felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken words lift from his shoulders. The contract and his annotations were out of his hands, slipping into the machinery of bureaucracy where they would scream their warning in unfiltered English. A flicker of movement on the security camera screen overhead caught his attention, but Victor remained statuesque, as silent as the shadows pooling at the corners of the lobby. Soon Veronica Hart would arrive, heels clicking across these very tiles, oblivious to the reckoning she'd dared with her offhand challenge. Her world of power and prestige would hinge on those pages, and on the sharp truth he'd delivered. He stepped away from the slot, the echo of his footsteps soft against the stone. The atrium doors behind him stood ready to usher him back into obscurity. He didn't linger to watch the envelope vanish into the maze of legal channels. Instead, he moved toward the employee entrance, the early light winking through tinted glass, painting his uniform in shades of gray and blue. Outside, the city stirred under a blanket of mist. Streetlights still burned in the empty streets, their halos melting into the damp air. Victor inhaled, tasting the promise of rain and possibility. His boots clicked on the pavement as he walked the few blocks home, each step a meditation on hidden courage. He passed a row of shuttered cafes and dim hotel windows where cleaning staff unloaded carts. None of them knew that history was being rewritten by a fellow janitor just a block away. By the time he reached Southgate Heights, the sun had broken the horizon, turning low brick buildings to gold. Victor paused at the corner bodega to pick up a loaf of bread and a carton of milk for Elena's breakfast, greeting the grocer with a tired nod. The grocer was busy stacking produce, oblivious to the high-stakes drama that had already unfolded in the gleaming tower downtown. Victor felt a secret smile play on his lips. Life continued in its ordinary rhythm, even as the balance of power began to shift. He walked the last 2 blocks home, his backpack still carrying the hidden proof of corporate vulnerability. The rhythm of city life enveloped him. Buses rumbled past, early commuters hurried by, and the distant wail of sirens underscored the world's pulse. Yet beneath the surface, Victor's heart drummed a different tempo, the quiet beat of someone who no longer considered himself invisible. Inside the apartment, the air was warm, with the scent of last night's dinner and the lingering notes of Elena's watercolor paints. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, illuminating the small sketches taped to the wall. Victor set down the groceries and hung his backpack by the door. He poured 2 cups of black coffee, one for him, one for his daughter, and placed them on the chipped kitchen table. Elena stumbled in, hair-tousled eyes blinking against the brightness. She yawned, rubbing her forehead. "Morning, Dad," she mumbled, wrapping her arms around his waist in a sleepy hug. Victor lifted her onto a chair and handed her the coffee decaffeinated for her and watched as she cradled the mug cheeks pink. He lingered in that moment, relishing her presence. This was why he'd taken the risk, to protect her future, to ensure that she'd inherit a world where truth mattered more than title. Over breakfast, they spoke of mundane things, the sketch assignment at school, the rain predicted for tomorrow, the neighbor's cat that had taken to sunbathing on their windowsill. Elena pored over her sketchbook, describing the new composition tulips leaning toward a sunset, while Victor nodded, distracted by the weight of what was unfolding downtown. He sipped his bitter coffee, reminding himself that the mission was already underway. By the time Elena left for school, her backpack bouncing in rhythm with her footsteps, Victor had prepared lunch and set aside today's uniform. He watched her through the window until she rounded the corner, then turned back into the living room. eyes drifting to the closed envelope waiting on his desk. It sat innocuously, a silent testament to the night's work. The morning passed in the haze of routine. He scrubbed bathroom tiles, restocked paper towels and cubicles, and polished handrails until the shine returned. Colleagues greeted him with sleepy smiles, oblivious to the documents that carried his name nowhere but would soon carry consequences everywhere. A cleaning cart rattled down the corridor in front of an office suite, and Victor angled his head, recalling the last time he'd visited that same hallway for a clandestine retrieval. Now he moved with the assurance of someone who knew that a single moment could upend years of complacency. Mid-morning, as he buffed the conference room floor, he caught sight of the legal team filtering in through the executive entrance. They paused at the slot, staring down at the brass panel. Someone tapped the front of the slot, with a knuckle testing perhaps whether something new awaited. Victor's mop handle trembled in his hand, but he kept polishing, making sure each echo was his last witness. Within moments, voices drifted toward him through the open door. He recognized the clipped tones of Samuel Green, chief counsel, and a litany of hushed speculations. He pressed his back to the wall, heart thundering softly beneath his uniform. Green's voice cut through. Someone left a translation, and I think it's authentic. This is more rigorous than any AI tool we've used. A pause. It looks like human work. Victor stifled a smile. Human indeed. He listened as they debated strategy, whether to call an emergency meeting, whether to find the source of the anonymous submission, whether to credit some ghostly outside consultant. Their uncertainty gave him satisfaction. They understood the value of the translation, but they didn't understand its origin. He finished polishing the last quadrant of the floor and wheeled his cart down the corridor. As he passed the legal office door, Green stepped out, tablet in hand, scanning the summary's bullet points. Their eyes met just for a moment. Green's lips parted as though to recognize him, but he thought better of it and looked away. Victor nodded curtly. Mop bucket wheels clinking behind him, then rounded the corner. In the break room, he retrieved a fresh cloth, wrung it, and began wiping the coffee machine. Each motion was deliberate, meditative. The hum of the machine mixed with the distant buzz of conversation. Victor closed his eyes briefly and breathed in the aroma of coffee grounds. Even in the midst of corporate upheaval, some things remained constant, the simple acts of cleaning and of brewing a cup of coffee. Both required patience and attention to detail, virtues he wielded as deftly as any legal brief. When his shift ended, Victor clocked out with the same ID badge he'd used for years. The security guard at the desk glanced up but offered no greeting. Victor returned the nod absent-mindedly and stepped outside into the bright morning sun. The city thrummed around him, a million lives intersecting in mundane dances. Yet for Victor Reyes, the world had shifted on its axis. The envelope he dropped into that brass slot had begun to unravel a system built on assumptions. Assumptions that he, a humble janitor, could not only read German patent text, but could also wield it to protect an entire company. He walked away from the building without looking back, the reflective glass facade catching his uniformed reflection one last time. He merged with the flow of commuters, as anonymous as ever, yet carrying within him the knowledge that he'd done something extraordinary. And though he would remain unseen in the quiet margins of his trade, Victor Reyes knew that the truth once unleashed would speak louder than any name. Victor Reyes adjusted the straps of Elena's backpack as they stepped off the curb into the morning bustle. The sun had just cleared the rooftops, casting a pale gold across wet pavement. It had rained the night before, tiny puddles clung to the sidewalk like glass marbles, and the clean scent of ozone lingered in the air. Victor inhaled, drawing strength from the cool morning, and squeezed his daughter's hand. Elena paused at the school gate, her small fingers wrapped around his. She glanced up at a cluster of classmates chatting by the entrance, their voices rippling like water over stones. Victor noticed a boy in a navy blazer lean in and whisper something to his friend. The friend laughed, the high-pitched sound carrying across the yard. Victor stiffened. He'd walked this route dozens of times. He'd learned to steel himself against the subtle slights, the sideways glances when parents said, "Hello," with a polite, distant nod, and hurried on. But today morning light fell differently, hitting his uniformed shoulders with an almost accusatory glare. He tightened his grip on Elena's hand, ready to shield her. The boy in the blazer straightened and pointed. "That's Elena. Her dad's the guy who mops our halls," he said, voice loud and certain. A few kids turned, their murmurs rising in a wave. "Mop guy hall janitor wipes the floors." None of them knew Victor's story. None had seen the contract translation that would save their parents' livelihoods. They only saw the man in the crisp blue uniform. Victor's jaw clenched. He forced himself to release Elena's hand and placed it gently on her shoulder. His heart pounded, but his voice stayed steady. "Let's keep moving, sweetheart." He offered a tight smile and began to guide her toward the door. Elena's chin lifted, her gaze drifting over the cluster of whispering classmates. For a moment, Victor feared she might cry or shrink back. Instead, she squared her small shoulders and turned to the boy in the blazer. Her voice rang out clear and confident, stronger than the clatter of backpack zippers and locker doors slamming. "My dad speaks 5 languages," she said, eyes level with his. The boy blinked, caught off guard. The other children fell silent, curiosity replacing mockery. Victor felt his breath catch, pride swelling in his chest like warm light. Elena stepped past the boy, meeting Victor halfway, and offered him her hand again. He took it, thumb brushing the back of her knuckles, and together they walked into the school. Inside the hall smelled of polished linoleum and elbow grease. The morning bell chimed faintly in the distance. Victor released Elena's hand and knelt so her eyes were level with his. "I'm proud of you," he said softly, voice thick with emotion. Elena smiled, a small, shy curve of her lips, then scurried down the corridor toward her classroom. Victor watched her go backpack, bouncing long brown hair swaying. He turned for the exit, shoulders lighter than they'd been all day. Outside again, the sun had climbed higher, warming the damp pavement. Victor squared his broad shoulders and stepped back onto the sidewalk, heading toward the building where he worked. Each step carried the echo of Elena's words. He repeated them under his breath. "My dad speaks 5 languages." He savored the hum of that truth, a balm for years spent hiding. They'd moved into this neighborhood when Elena was just a toddler, before he traded lectures for mop buckets. Southgate Heights was working class and proud. Neighbors nodded in greeting, sometimes pausing to ask about Elena's art projects or help carry groceries. But the school route still stung with reminders of his uniform, the badge clipped to his chest, the sturdy work boots, the janitor's cart rattling behind him. Victor's morning had started before dawn, polishing glass doors and empty hallways, lost in the weight of the translation he'd delivered anonymously to the legal drop. Every polished surface felt like a canvas wiped clean, ready for fresh truths to emerge. He'd poured his cold coffee in the quiet of his apartment, fingers stained with notebook ink, mind racing with the knowledge that his work would matter far beyond the echo of children's laughter. As he approached the building's side entrance, workers in suits streamed by sleeves, rolled up ties, loosened coffee cups in hand. They barely glanced at him. He gave a small nod to the security guard, exchanged the morning code, and stepped inside. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. His cart waited in the supply closet, mops, cloths, cleaning solutions neatly arranged. Victor selected his tools and headed into the first-floor corridor. Corridor after corridor, he buffed and dusted, each motion meditative. Before today, he'd taken solace in routine cleaning a spill until the floor shone, replacing empty dispensers, ensuring every corner was free of debris. But that routine had a new edge now. He moved with purpose, aware that each sweep of the mop erased traces of the night's chaos, preparing the building for its new dawn. In the lounge, he found stale coffee grounds in the communal pot and freshened the filter. He wiped counters and straightened chairs, then paused at the window overlooking the lobby. Light streamed in, painting geometric patterns on the glossy marble. His reflection stared back, Janitor Reyes, unassuming sentinel of polished floors and silent wars. His thoughts drifted back to Elena's words. 5 languages. It had been a fact he'd tucked away, a souvenir from happier days, lecturing at the university. He remembered the hush of the lecture hall as students leaned forward, fascinated by the music of Germanic verbs, the intrigue of legal jargon, the thrill of decoding meaning in the world's most precise language. He'd sacrificed that life to be present for Elena, choosing bedtime stories over conference calls, choosing scraped knees over academic applause. Now in the hush of this corporate lobby, he felt the convergence of both lives. He was the man who scrubbed floors, yes, and also the man who unveiled dangerous clauses to protect a company's future. Both identities coexisted, bound by a single thread, the power of language of truth wielded quietly. A soft chime tinkled as the front doors opened. A cleaning crew supervisor stepped in, nodding, and Victor stepped aside. The supervisor exchanged a few words with the security guard, both glancing at the legal drop box. Victor sensed their curiosity. They wondered what contents had arrived overnight, but the box remained locked silent. Victor returned to his mop, ignoring their puzzled looks. He made his way to the restroom, stocked paper towels, refilled the soap dispenser, and scuffed away a coffee stain on the tile floor. The work was unglamorous, but necessary, a backdrop to the unseen dramas unfolding in the boardroom above. He thought about Veronica Hart's oblivious stride into that legal slot heels clicking in time with her confidence. She had no idea the janitor's cart that wheeled past her corridors twice a night carried the confidential translation that would redirect the company's trajectory. The morning passed in a rhythm of chores and stolen glances at the legal team's anxious milling in the lobby. Victor fielded whispered snippets. "Did you see the summary? It's human work. We need to find the translator." He listened, mop in hand, absorbing every syllable that drifted down the stairs. The public remained unaware a nameless savior had spoken the truth. When his shift ended at noon, Victor parked his cart behind the janitor's closet and clocked out. He passed the security desk again, exchanged polite goodbyes, and stepped into the sunlit street. The humidity had lifted and the sky stretched in vast blue above. He felt a lightness in his steps as he retraced the path back to Elena's school. She emerged moments later, clutching a geometry worksheet. Her hair shone with sweat from an impromptu game of tag. She waved when she saw him, and he greeted her with a proud grin. "Guess what, Dad?" she said, bouncing on her toes. "Ms. Foster said my math is really good." "That's wonderful," Victor replied, his voice warm. "I knew you'd excel." Elena glanced at his uniform and then back at him. "You know, sometimes people say things that aren't nice, but I told them you speak 5 languages." She beamed, chest puffed out. "And they had to believe me." Victor laughed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Maybe next time tell them it's 6. Elena giggled, leaning into him as they walked home. The neighborhood hummed with midday life, porch swings creaked, sprinklers hissed, and the scent of grilling meat drifted in warm breezes. Victor savored the moment, father and daughter side by side, an ordinary afternoon suffused with extraordinary pride. He stopped at the corner bodega for a cold lemonade, handing Elena a coin for a candy bar. She bounded inside, emerging with a triumphant grin and a bright wrapper. They shared the treat on a low brick wall, legs dangling, cooling in the shade. Victor watched her take a small bite, eyes lighting up. He remembered teaching her the German word for butterfly when she was 4, pointing to a painted mural on their apartment wall. She'd giggled at the long compound noun Schmetterlingsschwarm, and he'd laughed too, marveling at childhood wonder. Now she was 9, wise beyond her years, fiercely protective of her father. He let the sweetness linger in his mouth, a reminder that small victories often shone brightest. His own path had been marked by losses and hidden sacrifices, yet this moment, sunlit and real, was the culmination of every choice he'd made. As the sun shifted and the afternoon edged toward evening, Victor rose. "Come on, mija," he said, using his special nickname for her. "Let's go home." She nodded and scampered by his side, chatter spilling out about art class and tomorrow's spelling test. Victor listened, feeling the steady rhythm of her voice settle into his bones. He had taken on an anonymous crusade in the corridors above, but here in the wide world of the street and the warm sanctuary of fatherhood, he carried his greatest achievement, a daughter who knew his worth before any boardroom did. Victor Reyes paused outside the school gates, the afternoon sun warming his shoulders as Elena waved goodbye and slipped inside. He watched her disappear into the swirl of backpacks and laughter, and in that moment a shadow slipped across his mind, one he had carried quietly for a decade. The bright day around him seemed to dim as the world folded backward, and he found himself standing in a different place entirely. He was 10 years younger then, his hair darker, and his uniform a tailored tweed jacket instead of a mop-stained polo. He stood before a lecture hall filled with eager faces, the mellow hum of anticipation vibrating off the high ceilings. The blackboard behind him was covered in intricate diagrams of German compound verbs, a spray of chalk dust over its surface like winter's first frost. A slide projected above showed a line of legal text, Haftungsausschluss, and he leaned forward, chalk in hand, voice rich with excitement, as he explained the subtle power hidden in that single word. Compound nouns in German, he told them, aren't just grammatical curiosities. They're weapons of precision. The students leaned forward in their seats, eyes bright. He walked down the aisle, chalk dust puffing from his jacket sleeve, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. In legal documents, every element of a compound noun is deliberate. It reveals intent, narrows meaning, or obscures truth. A ripple of laughter danced across the tiered rows, but beneath it, he could see the spark of understanding, the thrill of intellectual discovery. This hall was his home, and every word breathed life into him. That evening, celebration lingered in the campus bar where colleagues raised glasses to his soon-to-be-published paper, Semantic Precision in Germanic Patent Law. It was the culmination of years spent chasing footnotes through archives in Berlin and Vienna. He'd teased at breakthroughs in cross-linguistic compliance tips for drafting airtight contracts that even AI might miss. They toasted to his tenure-track appointment to a bright career ahead. His wife Sophia laughed beside him, her auburn hair gleaming under the amber lights, a sketchbook balanced on her knee as she doodled caricatures of professors with oversized spectacles. Elena wasn't born yet, but they imagined her a redhead like her mother, full of curiosity. The next morning, he woke to the phone ringing before sunrise. The voice on the other end was clinical. Mrs. Reyes's test results show a glioblastoma grade 4. We need to start treatment immediately. His heart stopped, the memory of chalk dust and applause evaporating in the instant it took to process the word cancer. He sat on the edge of the bed, breakfast dishes frosting on the nightstand, the world contract into a single point of unbearable gravity. Everything accelerated at once, hospital corridors lit by harsh fluorescence, his wife clad in a thin gown that did nothing to shield her from the cold. He held her hand through rounds of surgery, his lab notes and manuscript drafts lying untouched at home. The university called, "We understand the circumstances. Take the time you need." He left a voicemail for his department chair. "I can't teach this semester. Family emergency." His voice cracked on family. He avoided the word divorce, as if it might absolve him of betrayal. Days bled into nights in the sterile hospital room, machines beeping a steady reminder that life could be measured in flat lines and vital signs. Sophia's once fiery laughter became a soft sigh. Her sketchbook lay abandoned on the bedside table, her favorite pen rolling across the linoleum floor. He convinced himself that between treatment cycles, he could finish a chapter, proofread a section, but each time he opened his laptop, the blinking cursor reminded him that no research mattered without her beside him. Elena arrived weeks later, a 7-year-old bundle of energy whose questions pulled him back from the brink. "Why is Mommy sleeping so much?" she asked in a voice too small for the pain in her eyes. Victor knelt, gathering her into his arms in the narrow space beside Sophia's bed. He told Elena that her mother was tired, that the medicine made her sleepy, that it wasn't forever. But he knew the truth. The tumor was aggressive, and Sophia's health was slipping through his fingers like fading pages in an old manuscript. The university tenure committee waited by the end of the semester. They'd offered to extend his sabbatical, but he knew he couldn't return with his mind fractured between conferences and chemo drips. One morning, he drafted his resignation letter, the words dancing on the screen in cruel mockery of the papers he'd once written. He typed, "It is with profound regret that I must resign my position effective immediately. My family requires my full attention." He reread it, fingers hovering over the keys. Then he hit send. His colleagues replied with condolences and offers of help, childcare meal trains, book loans for Elena. But he felt the floor of his professional life crack beneath him. His name would fade from the department roster, references would vanish from academic programs, and his emerging reputation would stall. Yet each time he cleaned up a dropped tissue in the ICU, each time he read Elena a bedtime story, in the whir of hospital HVAC, he made a choice love over acclaim. Sophia's final weeks were a blur of tears and whispered reassurances. Victor read to her from poetry books, reciting verses of resilience beneath the sterile lamplight. She smiled once, her hand drifting to his cheek, voice raspy. "Thank you for being here." He held her, memorizing the sound of her breath, the slow rising and falling of her chest like a ghostly echo of the lectures he'd once given. When she slipped away on a cold morning in March, the world cracked open around him. There was no applause, no farewell address, just a nurse's soft announcement and a little girl clutching her father's hand, staring at the empty space beside him. After the funeral, Victor packed up his office. A rainbow of grammar text, annotated journals, framed photographs of Sophia's watercolor dreams. He left behind the lectern and the chalk, the podium, and the podium lights. Elena held a stuffed owl gifted by faculty as a token of hope, and he promised her a new beginning even as he wondered what began when the foundations of his life collapsed. They moved to Southgate Heights, a neighborhood where apartment blocks loomed modestly, and neighbors nodded in quiet solidarity. Victor found work as a janitor at Brightcore, drawn by the consistent hours and the thought that his daughter needed stability more than scholarly prestige. Each dawn he pushed his cart down fluorescent corridors, the scent of floor wax mingling with the echo of his footsteps. In those muted hours he found solace in simple tasks, wiping a smudge from a glass pane, lining up chairs in conference rooms, sweeping away the day's detritus. Every scrub and polish was a tribute to the order he craved in a world turned upside down. But inside the linguist he once was dreamed in fragments, visions of compound verbs unfolding across lecture slides, the hum of discussion in academic conferences, the thrill of a paper well received. At night, after Elena drifted to sleep, he would retrieve his leather lexicon journal from its hiding place and study it by lamplight fingertips, tracing the margins with a reverence that bordered on ritual. He whispered German phrases under his breath, practicing declensions he feared he might forget. It was both comfort and pain, a reminder of the man he had been and the man he had become. On rainy nights, the drops tapping on the window pane matched the rhythm of his heart, a steady beat of memory and loss. He would stand in the half-darkness of their living room, gazing at a faded photograph of Sophia's bright smile, a wedding portrait framed in their first home. Elena would wander in sleep in her eyes and ask in a soft voice, "Do you miss her?" Victor would crouch, hold her close, and say simply, "Always." Then he would tuck her back under the blankets and watch her chest rise and fall until sleep returned. And so the years passed, quiet mornings of cleaning, afternoons of fatherhood nights, of silent remembrance. He never spoke of his tenure or his unfinished paper. The academic world carried on without him. But inside each polished corridor he walked, he carried the weight of that past life. It resonated beneath his uniform, a hidden chord that lent power to his precision. Now standing outside Elena's school, the shadow of that loss folded back into the present. He exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The bright day resumed its color, and he felt the old ache soften just enough to make room for something else, pride in a daughter who knew his worth and the quiet certainty that every sacrifice had led him here. He straightened his shoulders, brushed rain-slicked hair from his brow, and stepped forward carrying the memory of loss as both burden and gift. Proof that he had loved fully, lived bravely, and emerged still standing ready for whatever came next. When the morning sun filtered through the tinted windows of Brightcore's 42nd floor, Veronica Hart was already pacing outside the executive boardroom. Her heels clicked against the polished marble in a staccato rhythm that echoed of impatience and beneath it, worry. She glanced down at her tablet. The screen dark now, but in minutes it would light up with the document that had arrived overnight, a human translation of the notorious German patent contract complete with meticulously annotated risks. She'd committed to anonymity but couldn't resist a peek before summoning her legal chief, Derek Lang. Inside the empty boardroom, the long walnut table gleamed beneath a row of recessed lights. Veronica flipped open her tablet, tapping the PDF icon. The first page of Victor Reyes' translation appeared clean. Typography, clear headings, and in the margins her own firm's logo stamped beneath stark red highlights. She inhaled sharply at the phrase unrestricted back-end access to client genome database, the very clause she'd joked about weeks ago. It sat there in plain English, a time bomb poised to detonate lawsuits and regulatory fines. When Derek Lang arrived, he found her standing at the head of the table, eyes fixed on the tablet. He brushed past two junior attorneys lingering near the door, their faces flushed and expectant. Morning, he began, but his tone faltered when he saw the document glowing in Veronica's hands. I didn't think anyone in this building knew German well enough to do this, Veronica said, voice low and incredulous. She handed him the tablet. Derek scrolled through the pages with careful reverence until he reached her favorite trap, Clause 12. 11 waives all indemnity protections and requires Brightcore to defend our partner in any data breach action. He looked up, jaw slack. This would have bankrupted us. Veronica ran a finger along the line. They never even noticed it. Not a single one of our legal team flagged this. Her eyes narrowed. Yet someone rendered a flawless translation and risk summary. It reads like the work of a senior partner at an international compliance firm. Derek tapped his pen against his notepad. I ran it through 3 AI tools overnight. None caught the co-ownership clause on page 17 or the IP surrender on page 19. And the annotations are too precise for machine learning. It's surgical. He exhaled, eyes glancing at the door. We have to find out who did this. Veronica shook her head. Anonymous was the point. We asked for a prank and we got truth. She slid the tablet into a leather portfolio. Call an emergency meeting at 10. We'll brief the board on the contract's dangers, then discuss how to respond and how to track down our ghost translator. Downstairs in the janitor's lounge, Victor Reyes refilled his thermos with black coffee. He'd just finished his rounds and clocked his second job call center shift. His uniform smelled of floor polish and fatigue, but his mind still buzzed with last night's work. He stopped mid-pour when he heard soft murmurs drifting from the corridor. Snippets of gossip about the anonymous translation. He leaned against the stainless steel counter, listening. They say it came in before dawn. Some say it's an external consultant with a security clearance. Honestly, it's better than anything we've ever seen in-house. Victor closed his eyes, tasting the irony they praised a work he'd labored over in locker room fluorescence, oblivious to the man in the mop-scented uniform. He squeezed the thermos cap tight, chest swelling with the knowledge that his translation had stunned the ivory towers. Then he slipped the thermos into his backpack and finished his shift. Meanwhile, the emergency meeting convened in the same boardroom just vacated. The chairs filled with board members CFO Gordon Hale, head of science Dr. Priya Kapoor, and several senior VPs who seldom left their offices before noon. Veronica stood at the head arms crossed as Derek summarized the morning's discovery. Good morning, everyone, Veronica began, voice crisp. What you see here is a human translation of our German patent contract delivered anonymously this morning. It highlights multiple high-risk clauses that, if executed, would compromise our proprietary genome database, surrender intellectual property rights, and potentially expose us to unlimited liability. This was overlooked by our entire team. She paused. Thanks to this translation, we've averted a catastrophic deal. Gasps rippled around the table. Eyes widened, hands flew to the table's edge. Gordon Hale tapped his fingers anxiously. Had that clause slipped through, we'd be bleeding money on lawsuits and possibly forced to hand over our biotech algorithms free of charge. His voice rose. Whoever did this must be a legend in German legal translation. Board members exchanged skeptical looks. Priya Kapoor leaned forward. We keep hearing rumors that it's a freelance consultant in Munich, but the turnaround was impossible. She shook her head. We need a lead. Veronica's lips curved into a sly smile. That's our next agenda item. How do we locate this translation genius? But first, let's focus on damage control. Derek, please outline our communication plan. As Derek detailed the steps, internal memo controlled Slack channels, and external audit. The board buzzed with nervous energy. They debated whether to announce the near miss publicly, how to reassure shareholders, and whether to tighten document handling protocols. Veronica listened, absorbing each concern, but her mind darted elsewhere. She found herself wondering about the translator's identity and why they chose anonymity. Was it caution, modesty, or something deeper? The meeting adjourned with action items and promises of secrecy. Board members drifted out, chattering about crisis management and PR spin. Veronica lingered, watching the polished shoes of the departing suits, imagining an invisible hand guiding the building's fate. She felt a strange kinship with that anonymous force, someone sharp enough to dig beneath corporate surfaces and bring truth to light. Back in the supply closet, Victor Reyes practiced unlocking the door code for the evening shift. He slid the magnet keycard through his uniform pocket, hearing the lock click. He stepped inside to grab fresh rags. The room smelled of cleaner, of rubber gloves and faded mop heads. He caught sight of himself in the metal supply cabinet, dark hair damp at the collar, uniform crisp but unremarkable. He closed his eyes, picturing the boardroom earlier that morning. Veronica Hart's gasp, Derek Lang's disbelief, the board's stunned faces. They talked of a phantom consultant, not realizing the savior they praised, moved through these halls twice a night, silent and unassuming. He let out a soft chuckle that rattled the empty closet. A coworker's voice came down the hallway. Victor extinguished the thought, sliding the cloth into his belt and stepping back toward the corridor. Floor 17, he reminded himself, a cleaning detail that would take him past Boardroom A and into the heart of the building where secrets slept behind locked doors. Further down, he paused at the restroom entrance, noticing a cluster of legal staff huddled in the hallway. Their conversation spilled out in rapid-fire whispers. I heard they're tracing IP logs, checking email metadata. If it's someone internal, they could be risking termination. Whoever it is must have credentials we don't even know exist. Victor felt a pang of sympathy. These were good people working overtime to protect the company he'd sworn to save. He wanted to warn them that the guardian they sought stood right before them, brushing countertops, wiping mirrors, pushing a cart laden with cleaning supplies. But he held his silence. They needed to believe in their own vulnerabilities before they learned of his intervention. He resumed scrubbing the men's room tile, the brush's bristles carving clean arcs into the grout. The repetitive motion cleared his head. He thought of Elena home now, sketching late into the afternoon. He imagined her proud smile and recalled how she'd told her classmates her dad spoke 5 languages. She'd believed in him before the board did, and that belief had given him the courage to act. By midday, the corridors whispered of acronyms and possible candidates. A former in-house consultant, a newly hired paralegal fluent in German, even rumors of an escaped AI experiment. Veronica's office door remained shut, a guarded fortress behind which she processed the enormity of the morning's revelation. But Victor wandered these halls with open access, the night's translation still fresh in his backpack, a secret oath bound to every step he took. As he wheeled his cart down the marbled corridor, he passed a reception desk where the night security guard dozed, donning ear protection and half a meal. Victor offered a polite nod, and the guard blinked awake, returning the greeting before drifting back to his coffee. The guard had no way of knowing this mopping janitor had delivered a lifeline to their corporate world. Later, as the afternoon waned, Victor slipped into the janitor's lounge for a quick break. He closed the door gently, the hinges whispering in protest. The room was half-lit fluorescent bulbs flickering overhead. He collapsed into a metal chair, pulling the thermos from his backpack. The coffee was stale but warm, a reminder of the night's quiet vigil. He took a long sip, feeling the caffeine stitched together his scattered thoughts. He thought of Veronica's gasp of the bored shock, and a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. They believed the translation was the work of an unknown titan, yet here he sat in threadbare uniform and scuffed shoes. He felt the weight of his secret lean into his bones like an old friend comforting in its familiarity. A muffled click sounded as someone tried the lounge door. Victor snapped upright, dropping the thermos behind the counter. He slung the backpack onto his lap, ready to vanish into the shadows. But it was only the day shift supervisor, clipboard in hand, hunting for a fresh mop head. "Evening, Victor," she said, voice loud in the small room. "Ready for the 6th floor spill?" He nodded, tucking the backpack under the table. Always. As he followed her into the corridor, he felt the familiar rhythm of his true calling resume, cleaning up messes, wiping away stains, making order out of chaos. But now his purpose was more profound. He was the keeper of hidden truths, a guardian who knew that real power often lay in quiet acts of revelation. And as he pushed his cart toward the next task, he carried with him the secret of the morning's shock, the knowledge that sometimes the smallest figures wield the greatest strength. The hallway outside the custodial supply closets was hushed in mid-afternoon lull, the distant click of heels against marble echoing down the corridor. Victor Reyes pushed his mop along the tile floor rim of his cap, low over his eyes, every motion deliberate and unremarkable. He had just finished restocking the paper towels when the door at the far end whooshed open and he heard the soft hiss of Veronica Hart's approach. His heart stuttered. He'd glimpsed her name on the security schedule earlier, but he never expected to meet her here in the echo of his own domain. Veronica stepped into view, tablet clutched in one hand, a sleek leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Her expression was a mix of determination and something softer, maybe curiosity. She waited until he set the mop aside, bristles splayed across a puddle of floor cleaner, then closed the closet door behind him with a gentle click that sounded louder than thunder in Victor's ears. "Mr. Reyes," she said, voice low but urgent. He straightened gloved hands, gripping the mop handle. "May I have a word?" He glanced up at her, his uniform's company patch, the mop jar at his heels, then back at the rows of brooms and cleaning supplies lining the closet walls. He nodded once. "Of course, Ms. Hart." Veronica stepped closer, lowering her voice as though the janitorial supplies themselves might overhear. "I know you translated the contract," she said, eyes steady on his. "And I know you dropped it in the legal slot anonymously." Victor's throat tightened. Despite the scrub-bright walls, the supply closet felt suffocating. He cleared his voice. "I'm not sure what you mean." She lifted the portfolio, brushing aside the leather to reveal the tablet. The document on its screen glowed under the fluorescent bulb, his translation, every margin note, every underlined risk clause. She flicked through the pages with forefinger precise and cool. "Who are you?" Veronica asked, her gaze returning to his face. His hidden life, the scholar he'd been, the sacrifices he'd made seemed to stir behind his calm exterior. Victor inhaled slowly, mentally tracing the path that had led him here, retrieving the contract, the late-night translation, the anonymous drop. "I'm just the person who saw it," he said, and felt compelled to act. Veronica's brow creased. She closed the tablet with a soft tap. "And you did this knowing the risks you could lose your job, your reputation." Her tone was neither accusatory nor admiring. It was measured, curious. She stepped closer until the space between them narrowed. Why Victor set his mop against the closet wall and ran a hand through his hair. He thought of Elena curled asleep on the couch, her trust in him absolute. He thought of the years he'd spent scrubbing floors to keep the world clean of what others overlooked. He squared his shoulders. "Because no one else would," he said quietly. "Because people needed protection from a deal they didn't understand. I did it for the company, but more than that for the people who depend on it, employees, clients, families." He met her gaze. "I asked for nothing in return." Veronica studied him, the linen of her suit contrasting with the blue fabric of his uniform. His eyes, dark and steady, held the legacy of a life she'd never known. Professor turned janitor, husband, turned widower, father, protecting his daughter's future. She felt the spark of the man he once was, buried beneath 11 years of invisibility. She reached out, hesitated, then tucked the tablet away. "I underestimated you," she admitted. Voice hushed. "I thought this was the work of some outside consultancy, someone with resources I could track." She shook her head as though chastising herself. "Instead, it was you." Victor let his mop slip from his grasp and leaned back against the supply shelf, boots scuffed but steady. "You challenged the building to translate a contract for entertainment," he said, a trace of wry humor in his tone. "I took that challenge seriously." A silence settled between them, soft as the hum of the building's HVAC. Veronica's eyes flicked to the row of cleaning products, industrial-strength degreaser disinfectant sprays. Cloth rags dyed faintly with bleach. She realized this small room was his world where he found order in chaos. She touched the edge of a folded rag on the shelf, fingers brushing its frayed threads. "You risked everything," she said after a moment. "You could have been fired for accessing confidential documents, for unauthorized translation." Her voice cracked with genuine concern. "Do you understand that?" Victor nodded. "I understand consequences, but I also understand obligations. Being a father taught me that silence can be the worst betrayal." He folded his arms, mop forgotten. "My daughter deserves a world where people honor truth over profits." Veronica's chest tightened. She remembered her own rise in the corporate world, the sacrifices she'd made for advancement, the moment she'd ignored quiet warnings in favor of deadlines. She reached out, placing a hand on his forearm, gentle, respectful. "You're remarkable," she said, voice low. "And right now I'm not sure how to follow through. I asked for a translation. I never expected justice delivered so brutally and beautifully." Victor's gaze softened. He drew in a steadying breath. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about what we fix next." His words, so simple, resonated with the weight of his sacrifice. "I don't want credit, Ms. Hart. I just want the company and the people it serves to be safe." Veronica closed her eyes briefly, absorbing his conviction. When she opened them, there was gratitude, respect, and something like hope. She straightened, smoothing the lapel of her blazer. "Then we'll do it your way," she said, quietly, effectively ensuring this never happens again. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a single business card. "If you ever change your mind, if you want to help us lead these efforts, call me." Victor accepted the card, the lamination gleaming under the fluorescent glare. He tucked it into his pocket next to his keys. "Thank you," he said, voice genuine. Veronica hesitated another heartbeat, then nodded. "Thank you." She turned, sliding the closet door shut behind her, leaving Victor alone with the hum of the supplies room and the echo of a promise he'd made to truth, to protection, to the spark of a past life he'd never fully buried. Victor Reyes felt the thrum of his heart in his throat as he waited outside the polished mahogany doors of the executive suite, backpack slung over one shoulder. The corridor was hushed, lit by recessed fixtures that gleamed on the marble floor. He'd been summoned just minutes ago by Veronica Hart's assistant. "They'll see you now, Mr. Reyes." He pressed a palm to his uniform shirt, breathing in the faint scent of lemon cleaner that still clung to his clothes. In that moment, he was neither janitor nor professor, but something in between, an uneasy bridge spanning two worlds. When the doors swung open, Veronica stood there in charcoal gray tailoring heels poised like punctuation marks on the floor. Behind her, Derek Lang and Gordon Hale waited, eyes shifting between her and the doorway. Victor stepped inside, the click of his shoes soft against the oriental rug. The suite smelled of leather-bound files and expensive coffee, and sunlight spilled through floor-to-ceiling windows into a panorama of the waking city. Veronica offered him a seat at the head of the table, gesturing to a high-backed leather chair usually reserved for visiting board members. He slid in, shoulders straight, and set his backpack gently on the floor beside him. On the table lay his translation binder, still fresh with his handwriting, and a printout of metadata logs Derek had printed for him. The swirl of morning light made the polished oak shine like gold. "Thank you for coming," Veronica said, voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "We've gone over your translation, and it's extraordinary." She inclined her head toward Derek, who cleared his throat. "Mr. Reyes, if it's all right with you, we'd like you to walk us through the document, and then we have a proposal." Victor opened the binder. Each page was crisp margins, annotated with red and black ink headings, underlined for clarity. He thought of the long night spent translating under the humming fluorescence of his cramped apartment, of Elena asleep on the couch, and the silent promise he'd made to protect her future. He looked up at the executives. "We'll start with the access clause on page 4, he said. He guided them through the clauses one by one: unrestricted back-end access, in Section 3, indemnity waivers, in Section 7, and the IP surrender tucked away in Section 12. He spoke with the calm precision of a seasoned lecturer, his voice resonant in the quiet room. When he reached the metadata logs, he laid a printout on the table. These records show the document was last edited from a terminal assigned to Eric Shaw's credentials at 2:14 a.m. The internal IP address matches his home network. It's clear someone inside tried to sneak this version through. Derek Lang's jaw tightened. Gordon Hale leaned forward, lips pursed. Veronica's gaze never wavered. She watched him unearth the corporate betrayal like a man unearthing a buried artifact. Victor felt the weight of their stares, not pity, but recognition. He'd laid bare the truth, and now the company stood at a crossroads of accountability. When he finished, the room pulsed with a low hum of stunned respect. Derek cleared his throat, glancing at Veronica. "This is beyond what we expected," he said. "Your translation didn't just catch us up, it built a case we didn't know we had." Veronica's hand moved to a folder at her elbow. She opened it and slid another document toward him. An offer letter printed on thick, cream-colored stock. Victor's breath caught. He picked up the paper, reading the lines carefully. The role was titled Director of Linguistic Risk and Compliance. It came with a competitive salary benefits and a stipulation that he would report directly to Veronica. No uniforms, no janitorial duties, just a seat at this very table, access to legal resources, and the authority to review every international contract before executive sign-off. He looked up, chest tight. He tasted the acrid tang of disbelief. Veronica leaned forward, eyes earnest. We can't undo what happened overnight, but we can change what happens from now on. We need your skill set, Victor, if you'll accept it. Victor closed his eyes for a moment, mind racing back to the lecture hall he'd left behind, to the hospital corridors where he'd held Sophia's hand, to the endless nights of cleaning floors to pay the bills. He thought of Elena waiting at home, her simple faith in his worth, and knew he owed her more than the quiet anonymity he'd clung to for so long. He looked up and found Veronica's gaze unwavering. "Ms. Hart," he said, voice steady, "I accept provided I can continue to work for the people who need protection, whether they wear suits or uniforms." She smiled, a genuine warmth that softened her usual precision. Derek and Gordon exchanged nods, and Veronica extended her hand across the table. Victor stood and shook it, a firm grasp that sealed not just a contract, but a promise of mutual respect. The sunlight caught the welt on her palm as she returned the shake. That afternoon, Victor walked the short block to his apartment, the world brighter than it had been in years. His uniform hung neatly in the closet. Tonight he'd hang a crisp new blazer in its place. The envelope containing his offer letter rested in his breast pocket, its presence a pinprick of joy against his chest. Inside, Elena sat at the small kitchen table, a watercolor spread before her like a miniature stage. She dipped her brush into cerulean paint, humming softly. When she saw him, her brush froze mid-stroke. She set it down and pushed back her chair, eyes shining. "Dad," she exclaimed. She rose and threw her arms around him, careful not to smudge his pants. He held her tight, feeling the familiar contours of her weight against him, solid, real, unshakable. He led her to the table and sat across from her, pulling out the offer letter. Elena leaned forward, peering at the typed words. She read the title aloud, Director of Linguistic Risk and Compliance. Her eyebrows shot up. "What does that mean?" Victor smiled, smoothing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "It means I get to keep doing what I love, finding hidden risks in words and protecting people from them, but I'll do it from an office with a team, and I won't have to mop floors anymore." Elena studied him, tilting her head. She thought for a moment, then her face lit up. "Dad, that's amazing. You deserve to be seen." Her voice was quiet but fierce, as if she'd long carried those words in her heart. Victor felt hot tears prick the corners of his eyes. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Thank you, Mija," he whispered, using his special nickname for her. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." She squeezed his fingers, and for a moment they sat there, father and daughter, the soft afternoon light wrapping around them like a promise. Outside, the city hummed with possibility. Victor Reyes, once invisible, was finally stepping into the light he'd earned and sharing it with the daughter who had shown him the way. Victor Reyes stood beside the long folding table in the community center's multi-purpose room, watching the morning light filter through high windows and dust motes drift over his daughter's painting. Elena's wildflowers gleamed in vivid watercolors, bright orange poppies, deep purple lupines, and a single pale blue forget-me-not peeking from the corner. The banner above them read, "What Lies Beneath." And the contest theme felt custom-made for their story. A scattering of art supplies lay on the table, watercolor pans, brushes worn smooth at the handles, a stack of heavy watercolor paper, and Victor's own leather notebook, its pages yellowed with ink and memories. He reached out and ran his finger over the edge of one page. Earlier that week, he'd tapped out the first line of his short piece, "Silence carries secrets deeper than any stone garden. Truth blooms only when someone dares to pull the weeds." He closed his eyes for a moment, recalling nights bent over that notebook, words flowing slowly at first, then tumbling out as if propelled by an urgent wind. Elena glanced up from her brush. "Dad, look," she said, voice light with pride. She'd just finished shading the petals on one poppy so that each curve caught the light like stained glass. Victor leaned closer. "It's gorgeous," he said. "You've captured the fire in their hearts." His daughter beamed, looping a stray lock of hair behind her ear. She dipped her brush in a pale wash of green and added delicate stems. Victor picked up his pen and notebook and scrawled the next line. He watched the world rush past polished floors, unaware that the man who mopped held its fragile truth in calloused hands. He paused, lifted his head, and met Elena's eyes. "How are your stems looking?" he asked, turning back to her painting. Elena smiled, a subtle tilt of her chin that matched his own teaching style. Firm, she said, but not too stiff. Flowers have to sway, or they'd never survive the storm. Victor chuckled. She always had a way with metaphor, her opinions bright as her art. He closed his notebook and set it beside the pans of paint. Then they'll stand strong. He reached for a brush and lightly sketched a stanza beneath her flowers on a separate sheet, hinting at the roots hidden under the soil. For 2 days, they'd worked side by side mornings in the tiny dining nook of their apartment, afternoons at the dining table, repurposed as a studio. Elena hummed show tunes as she painted. Victor read aloud his draft, listening for places where the rhythm faltered. Sometimes he paused, sliding his glasses up the bridge of his nose, then would scratch a new turn of phrase, "A whisper of ink can topple empires if only someone reads it." Elena would nod sagely, offering suggestions. "Bring it closer to home," she'd say. "Make us feel the footsteps in the halls." Now at the community center, they were the last to arrive for setup. Rows of folding chairs faced a makeshift stage, and nearby tables displayed dozens of canvases and stories. Families milled about, sniffing glue sticks and chatting about their entries. Victor spotted the art teacher from Elena's school, checking lighting on a series of clay sculptures. She waved him over. He nodded politely and returned to their table. The contest coordinator, a woman wearing a t-shirt splashed with paint, approached. "Good luck, you two," she said warmly. "Your entry has everyone curious." She tapped her clipboard. "The judges will start at 10. Enjoy the cupcakes and the coffee's fresh." She hurried off, leaving Victor with a plate of miniature vanilla cupcakes and a steaming urn of coffee. He poured himself a cup, inhaled its bitter warmth, then handed one to Elena, who drank gingerly. "Thanks," she said, eyes shining. Victor fetched a small easel from the corner and carefully set Elena's painting atop it. He pinned his story typed and printed on heavy ivory cardstock beneath her artwork, the two pieces forming a single display art above words below. The title, "What Lies Beneath," curled across both in bold script. He stepped back, smoothing his shirt, and admired how the flowers seemed to grow directly from the lines beneath them. At 10, the judges began their rounds. A trio of local artists and writers, clipboard in hand, paraded from table to table, pausing briefly to read, observe, and jot notes. When they reached Victor and Elena's stand, their leader, a gray-haired novelist with bright eyes, nodded approvingly. He read Victor's opening line aloud in a stage whisper, then studied the flowers. "Lovely synergy," he murmured to his colleagues, and scribbled something on his clipboard. Victor and Elena exchanged excited glances. Nearby other entrants watched too, some with polite smiles, others with expressions of envy. It was the first time Victor felt the quiet power of his words come alive beyond the binding of his notebook. He realized he wasn't just a janitor. He wasn't just the man who watched and listened. He was a storyteller whose voice could stand beside his daughter's art and hold its own. While the judges moved on, families drifted closer, murmuring compliments. A young girl pointed at the poppies and said, "I love how they glow." Elena grinned and explained how poppies signified memory and healing, and how she wanted her painting to whisper hope under calm petals. Victor felt warmth in his chest as people listened. He added, "And the story beneath reminds us that true beauty often hides in plain sight." By noon, the winners were announced in the packed hall. First prize went to a collaboration between a local sculptor and a poet. Second prize to a teenage photographer and her sister's accompanying haiku. Victor's display was called for third place. The applause was gentle but genuine. Elena jumped up and down while Victor offered his hand in triumphant support. They stepped forward to accept a small ribbon cerulean blue for third place and a certificate praising their evocative unity of art and prose. After the ceremony, they returned to their table and carefully packed their pieces. The ribbon fluttered from Victor's notebook strap. Children clustered around asking how they came up with the idea. Victor knelt to their level and said simply, "Flowers and words both come from deep places. We just had to give them space to speak." Elena nodded, brushing a smudge of blue from her cheek, and we listened. As they walked home, contest ribbon pinned to his jacket lapel, Victor thought of the lecture halls of his past, of the nights spent scrubbing floors in search of solace, and of the long road that led him to stand here beside his daughter. The world had scoffed at his uniform, had whispered that a janitor could never be a scholar, could never shape words that mattered. Yet here on a community stage, his story had stood tall. Elena skipped ahead, humming a melody from her art class. Victor pulled his notebook from his pocket thumb, catching on the ribbon, and read the inscription at the top of their certificate for revealing the hidden blossoms of courage. He tucked the paper into his notebook, then slipped it back beside the pens and folded brushes. That night, in the quiet of their apartment, Victor placed the certificate and ribbon on the bookshelf beside his daughter's sketchbooks and his old lexicon journal. He looked at Elena's watercolor taped above the wildflowers, glowing in the lamp's soft light. She climbed onto his lap, curling against his chest, and he felt the fullness of his reclaimed voice, proof that truth and beauty, when shared, could transform even the most mundane of lives. Elena wrapped her arms around him and whispered, "Dad, this was the best day ever." Victor smiled, brushing a kiss across her forehead. "Mine too, sweetheart," he said. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the promise of tomorrow. Tonight, words and art slept side by side, and in their gentle union, Victor Reyes found the redemption he'd long sought. A creative redemption born of truth, love, and the quiet courage to speak what lies beneath. 1 year later, Victor Reyes paused in the silent corridor outside his office and let the polished stillness wash over him. The morning sun filtered through tinted glass walls, tracing warm stripes of light across the dark carpet. He straightened his jacket, no longer a mop-worn uniform, but a tailored navy blazer, and reached out to push open the frosted glass door labeled Linguistic Integrity. A half smile curved his lips as the door clicked shut behind him, sealing him in the quiet sanctuary he'd earned. Inside, the room smelled faintly of aged paper and fresh coffee. His desk, once a janitor's supply table in the break room, had evolved into a sleek workspace complete with dual monitors, reference texts on international data law, and a neat stack of contract drafts awaiting his review. Victor took his usual seat behind the desk, the leather chair conforming to his shoulders. He glanced down at the top drawer where his dusty nameplate lay nestled beside a framed photo of Elena painting poppies. He slid it into view, Dr. Victor Reyes, Director of Global Compliance. He ran a fingertip across the engraved letters and let out a quiet breath. The weight of the title felt both foreign and familiar, an echo of the life he once left behind, but in a role transformed by his own quiet courage. That morning, his inbox held 2 urgent requests, a biotech partnership contract in German and a cross-border data sharing agreement in Japanese. He clicked open the first file, tracing his eyes over the initial clauses. Years ago, unrestricted back-end access sneered at him from those lines. Now he spotted a subtle amendment that would have slipped past all but the most trained eye. He underlined it in red, adding his concise margin note, "Required geographic limitation. Retain IP rights exclusively." He saved the change and transitioned to the next document. As he worked, memories drifted through the polished stillness. He remembered slipping the anonymous translation into the legal slot, feeling the thud of paper as though it were a lifeline thrown to a floundering ship. He recalled Veronica Hart cornering him in the supply closet, her eyes wide with the realization that the janitor had rescued her empire. He remembered standing in this very hallway 1 year ago, uniform still pressed from the night shift, heart-pounding as he walked toward these doors for the first time. And he remembered Elena's whisper, "Dad, you deserve to be seen." He paused in his editing, saving his work, and leaned back. A soft knock on the door frame drew his attention. Veronica stood there, tablet in hand, and that controlled warmth in her gaze. "Good morning," she said quietly, stepping inside. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Victor shook his head and gestured toward the seat opposite. "Not at all. How can I help?" She perched on the edge of the desk, crossing one foot over the other. "The board wants your input on a new compliance initiative, our Asia-Pacific expansion. They'd like you to join the strategy call later this afternoon." He registered the invitation with a hint of wonder. A year ago, he would have scrubbed floors during such calls. Now he would shape policy. He nodded. "Of course. I'll prepare the risk analysis." He tapped the open Japanese agreement on his screen. "I've already flagged a section on secondary use of data. It needs clarification." Veronica offered a genuine smile. "That's why we need you." "Thank you, Victor." She paused as if weighing her next words. "Also, Elena's school art show is next week. I'd love to come if it's all right." Victor's chest warmed. "I'd like that." He stood and extended his hand. She accepted it, firm and respectful. "Thank you." She left, and Victor resumed his work with renewed focus. The office was quieter than ever now, humming with the promise of purpose. He thought of the hundreds of contracts he'd reviewed in this chair, each one a potential trap, waiting for a compassionate eye to uncover it. He recalled times when a misplaced comma could cost millions, and how so often the world trusted in algorithms or cursory reviews, never expecting that a former janitor could assemble the human insight to catch what machines and experts overlooked. By midday, he finished his preparations for the strategy call. He saved all annotated documents into a single folder, added his summary memo, and titled it APAC Compliance Risks, Victor Reyes, 07/20/2026. He leaned back and closed his eyes, reflecting on how far he'd come. In those first days behind this door, he'd struggled to believe he deserved a seat at the table. Now he understood that every whisper of truth he'd uttered had built the foundation for his role and for a culture that learned to listen. The conference call buzzed to life, and Victor greeted his colleagues with quiet confidence. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of lived experience, the precision of academia married to the empathy of a caretaker. He guided the team through regulatory nuances, pointing out hidden assumptions in draft clauses, and suggested revisions to safeguard privacy and intellectual property. Nods flickered across faces on the screen. His input shaped action items. His voice directed decisions. At the close, the board chair thanked him, calling him indispensable. Victor allowed himself a small private smile. After the call, he stepped out into the mid-afternoon sunlight that flooded the executive wing. Polished brass elevators reflected his image, a man whose uniform had been replaced by a tailored suit, but whose steady posture remained. In a moment of reflection, he placed 2 thumbs in his jacket pockets and exhaled. Feeling the whispers of the past transform into a clear, resonant note, he was here because he had saved the company with silent determination. He was here because he had never lost faith in his own voice. That evening, he arrived at the community center's art show, where a proud crowd gathered to admire their children's creations. Veronica stood by the doorway greeting guests, while Elena beamed beside her display of wildflowers now framed and mounted. Victor squeezed Elena's hand and marveled at her maturity. She stood confidently in her own small moment of recognition. "Look," she whispered, pointing to a plaque beneath her painting, "Honorable Mention Creative Vision." Victor knelt, brushing a kiss to her forehead. "Congratulations, sweetheart." He scanned the room, spotting familiar faces, parents who had cheered their contest entry neighbors, who'd praised his translation long ago. None of them knew the full measure of his journey, but they knew him here, appreciative, engaged, guiding his daughter's celebration. Later they walked home under a canopy of stars. Elena carried her ribbon and a small program booklet. Victor carried his notebook and the tranquility of a father who had reclaimed his destiny. The night air was crisp, carrying faint laughter from distant parties, as if the world itself recognized their quiet triumph. At their apartment, Victor placed Elena's ribbon on her bookshelf beside her watercolor set. He retrieved his own leather journal and added a new line under the spines of so many others. The strongest voices whisper, "The invisible save us all." He closed the cover gently, the words sealed as truth. Before bed, he looked at his dusty nameplate lying inside the drawer of his office desk. Tomorrow, he would mount it on his door. He would believe in it fully because it was earned not as a claim to fame, but as a testament to quiet courage. He promised himself that he would never again hide behind invisibility, but always listen for the hush of danger and speak the soft truths that could protect the world he held dear. Victor Reyes turned off the lamp, feeling the calm settle in his bones. Outside, the city slept, unaware that behind one frosted glass door, a man once invisible had shaped destinies with the power of his whispered convictions. And in that serene moment, he knew legacy is measured not by volume, but by the courage to speak when it matters most.